Hello and welcome to the Michael Calderin Show. We're so glad you could join us today. Happy New Year to you. This is our first
Happy New
show
Year.
in
Happy New Year.
2022.
Thank you
And
for having me.
yes, thank you so much, Kathleen, for joining us. And before we go into to discussing your background and your book, I just want to give the listeners a bit of your background. So, Kathleen Butler spent 10 years as a targeting officer within the CIA's Directorate of Operations Counterterrorism Center. Both at Langley and on temporary assignments in the Middle East, Kathleen spearheaded operational efforts to achieve some of the most sensitive foreign intelligence objectives in Afghanistan and Iraq. She has both firsthand knowledge of targeting methodologies used in the recruitment of spies and extensive field experience in working with foreign liaisons to discover and apprehend terrorists abroad. She's a staunch advocate for women's rights in the Middle East and has worked for human rights campaigns in Afghanistan to protect and promote the rights of disenfranchised Afghan women and girls. Her first book in a planned series, Juliet's War, merges multiple genres featuring elements of spy, thriller, and romantic suspense. She lives in Charleston, South Carolina with her husband and children. How's that for a bio?
Sounds good. And it sounds a lot more exciting than it actually is, I think.
You think? So
I
tell
think
it.
so.
So tell us, like, what
Yeah.
drew you to go into the intelligence field?
So I think it just kind of started with a natural kind of curiosity about international affairs. I studied international affairs at Florida State. And after 9/11,
Oh, so you're a Seminole.
I am.
All
Yeah.
right. We have a lot of Seminole listeners.
Oh, good. Go Seminoles. Go FSU. Um, yeah, so I think just, after 9/11, it kind of shifted things for me in terms of what I was looking to do career-wise. At first, I wanted to be a foreign service officer. And so I did a internship at the American Embassy in Paris. And there I worked in the consulate section and got involved in some passport fraud cases, people trying to come to the United States that really shouldn't be coming to the United States. And again, this is after 9/11. And I think that kind of piqued the interest of CIA. The fact that I was working overseas and had some overseas work experience, and obviously the language there, and studied international affairs. And I think that's kind of how I got roped into the whole intelligence business.
Okay. And let in terms of the makeup of the intelligence field, if you will, and I know that there are multiple intelligence agencies operating under the United States government. Different branches of military all have intelligence, and and the director of Central Intelligence is kind of the umbrella for it all. But in terms of the industry in the field, what percentage would you say roughly are female?
So the CIA, to my knowledge, doesn't publish those kind of statistics. Unfortunately, we don't have a really good handle on that. I'm sure somewhere in the Department of Human Resources they have that, but I certainly don't have access to it, and I have no idea. I can tell you that, and working and living abroad, that I was really one of the only female officers in a lot of situations, especially working with foreign intelligence agencies. There are not a lot of women. But that being said, I worked a lot with Middle Eastern intelligence agencies, and there are just not a lot of women in their workforce at all. So I would say that the CIA is doing better than most intelligence organizations, but I'm not sure they're where they need to be in terms of promoting women within the agency. I think that's really the issue, that it's still kind of a good old boys network. Unfortunately, there have been some great strides, with women assuming leadership roles, but I think especially at the levels that I was in, that men are very much still kind of running things. And that can be very frustrating.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And when you entered into your service, was that prior to having a family?
Yes. It
Okay.
was. Yeah.
And how was that with your immediate family and friends? I imagine some people knew where you were working and some people didn't.
Yeah, yeah. So, Washington's kind of an interesting place. Like you'll be out at a dinner party or you'll be out at a bar and someone will kind of ask you, what do you do? And you just try to make it sound as boring as possible and they kind of back off. Um, and then as far as like my immediate family is concerned, my parents knew because, they require a really high level of security clearance, something called a top secret SCI with a lifestyle polygraph. And that involves um, a good deal of digging into your background and interviewing your immediate family and then a lot of your friends that you've known throughout your life. And so I think whenever they went out and did those interviews, people kind of knew, all right, maybe Brittany's doing something kind of spooky. And then of course, like I was able to tell my parents, and my friends knew I kind of had like a job somewhere spooky, but they knew just not to ask too many questions. And I got, used to talking around it. And with my husband, this is kind of a funny story. When we were dating, this is kind of gruesome, but I'll kind of give you a little bit of an insight into the intelligence community at the time. So I was a targeting officer, right? So what that means is you target terrorists for killer capture operations, or you target them for recruitment operations, the actual like handling of spies. And I was part of it was called the Raids of Christmas, the 12 Raids of Christmas. And you baked something that symbolized the demise of a terrorist. And so it just so happened I was targeting one of my first targets ever, a Moroccan gentleman. And he was on, one of the top terrorist list. And I had his face put on a cake as part of the 12 raids of Christmas, celebrating the fact that we were apprehending these really bad guys. And my husband goes into the refrigerator, opens it up one night. He was my boyfriend at the time, and sees this big cake, this big sheet cake with this Moroccan gentleman on it, and is like, "What is this?" And so I think that kind of gave him a clue I was into something kind of strange or whatever. And then once we were engaged, I was able to tell him, I was able to have him come visit me at CIA. My mom and my sister were able to come and see me. Of course, they couldn't go into the vaults, but they were able to come and have lunch with me and there's a Starbucks inside CIA and, that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I could just imagine he opens the refrigerator, sees this cake with
Says,
this
what? Who is
Moroccan
this
guy on
guy?
there.
Who
And
is
it's
this?
like, is she
Yeah.
cheating on me?
Right, right. Yeah.
Right?
I think that was probably his first thought. And then but he knew I was in something in, the Defense Department, and just kind of figured, something to do with that. And when he asked more questions about it, I was like, yep, can't, no more.
Right, right. And is there a working relationship, or at least at that time?
Mhm.
Because we're going back how many years now?
So this is 2006.
Okay.
Yeah.
So was there any type of working relationship between your work and who you were and say other agencies like the FBI, particularly working with other women?
Yeah, yeah. So I worked at the National Counterterrorism Center, was my first job in intelligence. And there is where they kind of tried to create a model of, federal and local government agencies working together to prevent terrorist attacks. And so you had FBI and CIA at the federal level working with police and local agencies. And so I worked a good deal with the FBI whenever I was there. And it was a good relationship. I mean, we had learned from our mistakes in 9/11 about the sharing of information. And I actually worked to spearhead something called the National Counterterrorism Online Center. And what that did was it was like a database of information, and it brought together, this is from the 9/11 Commission report, they need to bring together both the federal, the intelligence on the federal side, and trickle that down to, the local law enforcement agencies. And so I was a part of an effort to kind of spread the word about that program. And so I traveled throughout the United States with my FBI colleagues to talk to local law enforcement about, this is how you get access to this information. This is what this means. This is how to put it in context. And so that was a really good experience for me. I found that a lot of the local law enforcement agencies were very happy and pleased to be getting that level of information, and to help their efforts to protect the homeland.
Okay. Were there times in your career there where you were in fear for your life?
Oh, overseas, yes, definitely overseas. One of the scariest situations, I would say, I was on an operation in Jordan and was attending a high threat meeting. And basically, what that means is we're meeting with an individual, and we're not sure if the individual is, um, has nefarious intentions, that he wants to actually hurt intelligence officers, or he has information that he's willing to provide us in order to help apprehend a terrorist abroad. And so that was nerve wracking, not knowing, going into this hotel room, not knowing if this guy has, it's got bombs on him, or, is intending to kidnap me and my colleagues. So yeah, I would say that was the scariest time I ever had, but it actually ended up being just fine. And the individual, a terrorist, had a very interesting story. And you kind of, when you read about these things or you see them on television, they're so abstract, and it's almost like you dehumanize the terrorist. Looking at them in the eye and hearing their story about how they came to work for an organization like Al Qaeda in Iraq, you're really taken aback about, wow, this could really happen to anybody in their situation. In this particular situation, this poor guy, his, wife and kids, they were threatened, their lives were threatened. And so he really had no choice but to join up with these, I like to call them gang members. It was kind of like a gang,
Right.
and so you see how that he got wrapped into all this, and then, but then he helps you, basically to kind of root out these, thugs. And, it's a good story in the end, but, it can be very scary initially, not knowing what an individual's true intentions are.
And in the past, we've had Mohammed Kamran, who is an Afghan translator who helped U.S. Special Forces for about 10 years.
Yeah.
Did you have any interaction with interpreters over there that helped U.S. interests?
Yes, yes. Actually, my really good friend, Shakria, who inspired me to write the book, she spent years as a translator for the intelligence and defense organizations, and just a stellar individual. And I have the utmost respect for those individuals that have helped us. And ultimately, that's kind of what led to my leaving the intelligence community, was this feeling of, I had a hard time with whenever we couldn't help the people that had helped us. And at least at CIA, they kind of had to meet this very high level threshold of intelligence reporting in order for us to help them either get out of the country or resettle them. And it's very hard to see, people who help us get hurt.
Right.
Because initially you're promising to protect them as the
Right.
intelligence officer. You're saying, hey, if you give me this information, I'll make sure nothing happens to you and your family. And then when you can't carry through with that promise, it's a horrible feeling.
Yeah, and a lot of the translators who have helped have been flagged by ICE, you know, and they have not been granted asylum or visas to come. It, do you think, and again, this is just your opinion,
Yeah,
um, that there could be a disconnect between the intelligence community and agencies like ICE and Homeland Security?
absolutely. Absolutely. We had that experience. Yeah, I worked on the watch list for several years, and we definitely had this disconnect. I was in kind of a unique situation when I worked on the watch list because I had worked in the counterterrorism center and I really understood intelligence collection and reporting. And I was working with quite a few officers that this was kind of their first job in intelligence. And they would see the name Muhammad and they would see bomb in the same report and say, oh, well, Muhammad must be a terrorist because bomb is in the same report as the name Muhammad. And when things are taken out of context and when you're not looking at it within a larger framework, or a officer just doesn't understand Arabic naming conventions, right? Like you don't know that Muhammad is a very common name. It's often not their true name. It's something called a kunya that it's provided to a man when they have their first child. Um, like Muhammad al-Qubaisi, right? Al-Qubaisi could be from Qubaisi, or it could mean father of Qubaisi if it's Abu Muhammad al-Qubaisi. So knowing those little tidbits, you're able to make an educated decision about an individual. But if you don't understand Arabic naming conventions, you don't understand intelligence reporting, and um, I can see how mistakes can very easily be made. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes the people that are making those decisions don't have all the right information and don't have the background to be making those type of judgments.
I should have had this interview with you 2 weeks ago because I just returned from Egypt, where I
Oh,
was on a
wow.
family vacation, and
Wow.
and I'd say every male I met was either named Abdul,
Yeah.
Muhammad,
Yeah.
Hussein, Rafiq,
Yeah.
and I would have loved to have had some kind of understanding of the naming conventions.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. No, I mean, that was one of the first lessons that I got at CIA when I became a targeter was, that's not their real name. That, you have to you have to find out their true name, and then that's their true identity. They're given a kunya when they have their first child, or sometimes they're called that because they're from a certain region of Iraq or a region in Afghanistan. So yeah, no, it can be very confusing.
Yeah, definitely. I
Yeah.
mean, I just learned something, and I'm sure our listeners did too about that, because
Yeah.
I had no idea. I'm like, I haven't, it's like everyone I met, whether it was a Uber
Mhm.
driver, taxi
Mhm.
driver, a server, it's like we
Mhm.
just kept seeing the same names.
Yeah.
And it's like, how is it that everybody has the same name?
Yeah. 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 No, I know it can be very confusing.
So I appreciate you talking about the naming conventions,
Sure.
and switching gears slightly.
Yeah.
I know that you're an advocate for women's rights in the Middle East,
Mhm.
and that's got to be one of the biggest challenges is to be in the Middle East, coming from the United States,
Yeah.
land of the free,
Right.
where in the Middle East, many countries, if not all, and please, I'm no expert on the Middle East, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but
Mhm.
pretty much every country over there, Middle East, as well as, say, North Africa, right? Countries
Hmm.
like Egypt. And um, there are stringent rules for women, whether
Right.
it be how they dress or the type of work they can do.
Hmm.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I think it really does depend on the country. So places like the UAE, they have been really, they promote women's rights like crazy, and they're very involved in countries like Afghanistan and Iraq that have a ways to go. Jordan, same thing. They are doing great things in terms of helping disenfranchised women and children. So I think it's, you don't want to make too much of a generalization about all the Middle East is this way, because there are several countries that have made quite a few strides within the last decade, in terms of promoting women's rights in the Middle East. I think that it's very difficult to know how to help in places like Afghanistan and Iraq, because we're really limited now that our presence is not as uh, both welcome and visible. And so it's hard to know how to help. One of the ways that I've helped in the past, I worked for an organization called Women for Afghan Women, and they provide funds to shelters in Afghanistan, for women and girls who are abused or find themselves in situations where they need to leave their abuser, their attacker, and go stay somewhere safe. Um, with any organization, it's hard to know if the money is going to the right people and if it's not getting stuck in the wrong hands. And so I've been more inclined to donate to organizations like the Afghan American Women's Association, because I find that particularly Afghans living here, whether they be refugees in recent years or they've been living here for 50 years, they're the ones who have the best connections on the ground to get the money into the right hands. Because they still have family there, they still have friends there, they know how to get those funds to the right people. So, in terms of helping, you know, the situation on the ground in Afghanistan in particular, I think that's the best way to go about it is providing those funds to people here that are connected, either familial ties or friendship ties with people on the ground, and knowing how to get that money into the right hands. Um, I think it's important that we see women over there as not as victims, but that they're very powerful. They've survived years of civil war, so much social and financial strife, and they're incredibly resilient. And I think a lot can still be done in terms of helping them to regain their human rights, their opportunities for education, healthcare, work, mobility, um, just helping them to take their own financial and social well-being into their own hands, I think is the best way to help them, through grants for small business, helping to provide the infrastructure they need to do more with their lives and to be able to stand on their own. Um, yeah, that's kind of how I see, it's incredibly difficult and complex, and I can't begin to provide all the answers or understand it fully. But I know in my little small way, the way I've gone about it is partnering with the Afghan women themselves, Afghan women living here, to help promote change from within, rather than, as an American woman, trying to understand all the nuances and all the complexities that go along with their culture and their religion and their identity. I'm going to rely on the experts, the Afghan women themselves, and Iraqi women, to tell me how to help.
And when we talk about abuse, is it considered abuse over there, or is it considered abuse for us with an American perspective?
I think that's That's a good question. I think it's abuse no matter which way you look at it. Um, within their culture and religion, and again, speaking from, as a white woman, I can't, begin to understand all the nuances, but their Khadijah is one of the women in Islam that they uphold as, you want to emulate Khadijah, the first wife of Muhammad. And she was an incredibly powerful woman who was a business owner and wealthy, and she had the utmost respect. And I think the main thing that's wonderful within their culture and their religion is just their respect for women, um, like Khadijah, like using that as the basis for how they treat women. They revere women, and I think to a large extent, the argument for the hijab and the facial coverings and those things is to protect and guard their women because they have the utmost respect for them. And I think concentrating on those things is where we need to kind of redirect our attention, because there's so much within the culture and religion that should be um, revered in terms of how they treat women. And I don't think you can focus on the cases you hear about in the news and say, okay, this is how they as a society treat women, because you hear about some atrocities going on, because to the large extent that's not how they treat women. Their women are respected and revered. And
This is
so
the first time I'm hearing that.
really,
I've never heard that before.
really, okay, yeah, no, I mean, so I have a family friend, and there's several Afghan refugees living with them right now. And I've talked quite a bit to them and the women there, and just in terms of how the Afghan refugees treat the women, the American women in the household, just with so much respect and so much reverence. And to a large extent, more so than maybe American men always do. So I think you have to be careful not to make a generalization about Muslim men and how they treat women, or how Middle Eastern men treat their women, because I think from what I have seen, at least, they do treat them with a lot of respect and admiration. And it's some isolated cases that you hear about that really tend to color them in this very evil, bad way. That's not how all men are over there.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because again, I had never heard that before, and of course, we only hear about the atrocities and abuses that take place, right?
Right.
Just like media everywhere,
Yeah.
you know, um, if it bleeds, it leads, right?
Yeah.
And we don't have enough of the good stories and the
Right.
heartwarming stories. We only hear about the negativity. So it's very, very enlightening to have your perspective, and and based on your experience. And how challenging has it been to be an advocate? And I just want to mention, I saw that there's a journalist that just, and apparently she's an advocate for women's rights over there in the Middle East. Mazi Aline Jad. It's
Okay.
she just won the Nobel Peace Prize for
Wow.
her work.
Wonderful.
I just saw that. I think it was this morning.
Yeah.
But I imagine that there are a lot of women like yourself, both Middle Eastern born and American born, that
Mhm.
are truly out there advocating for
Yeah.
women's rights and advocating for some change.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a lot of women that feel the way I do. And, having had the experience of living and working in the Middle East, and seeing both sides of it, seeing women being really respected, and then also seeing women not so much. Um, I think we can lend a good outlook when it comes to promoting human rights in the Middle East. I'll share with you one story. When I was in Iraq, I was working with a foreign liaison service, and they invited me to go out to dinner. And here you go out to dinner, and you walk in a restaurant, men and women everywhere. Only woman in the entire restaurant, right? And it was just really, really bizarre. And as a young 20-something woman, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm the only female in here. And I asked, a colleague of mine, and I said, what is up? Like, really, women aren't even allowed to go out to eat? And he said, no, it's just kind of the way it is. So there are there are some issues, some major issues, and I don't want to like not shed light on that, by talking about the men that do have respect for women. But just common things like going out to eat at a restaurant, not being allowed to do that. I can't imagine that. And I definitely see something really wrong with that.
Is it as common as it is in the United States? Is it as common to find women working for foreign intelligence services?
Oh, overseas?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, there are not. There are no women working for foreign intel. I don't want to say no. I don't know that for absolute 100% certainty, but in my experience, I never met a woman working for an intelligence organization. Besides the Brits and Australians, I did not.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you ever feel that they members of other foreign intelligence agencies did not treat you as an equal because you're a woman?
No, so that's an interesting question because I think that they saw me as a completely different species. That sounds weird,
Hmm.
but as a American Western woman, I was a completely different species. And I was treated as an equal. I worked a lot with the Jordanians. I worked a lot with the Emiratis, and they always treated me with the utmost respect. I never had any issue there. But they've also been working with us for years. We have a very strong partnership with them.
Right.
So I got nothing but respect from them. Now, I never worked with Mabahith, the Saudi intelligence organization. So I don't know if my experience would have been the same there. Um, but I've heard from friends and colleagues that it can be a little bit more difficult. And especially with, working, with terrorists abroad, trying to get information and so forth. I did have to rely a little bit more on my male colleagues in some situations to say, listen, don't give this woman any shit.
Right.
And of course our Jordanian and Emirati friends, whenever they're involved in those meetings, they're, very much so of the same mindset. Don't give this woman any shit, so they're protective. But then they also know that I can stand my ground when it comes to getting the information I need.
Okay. And what was the turning point for you when you decided, okay, I've served my country, time to close shop?
To be quite honest with you, I was burnt out. I had worked, some of the real hotspot areas, Iraq and Afghanistan. At that time, it was incredibly stressful, and I was working 10, 15-hour days. And at toward the end, I'd had one son who was 2.5, and I was pregnant with my next son. And I was working in Afghanistan at the time, and going back and forth, and I was just exhausted, and I felt like I couldn't be the kind of mom I really wanted to be. And unfortunately, I had a really good friend die back in 2010. I'm not sure if you've heard of the Coast attack that killed 7 CIA officers, but
Yes.
um, yeah, two of the officers I worked with in Jordan. And actually, in that high threat meeting I talked to you about, the two of them were in that high threat meeting with me.
I'm so sorry.
Thank you. And Darren, one of the CIA officers, he had a little girl at the time, 2 years old, 2 or 3 years old. And I remember having these conversations with him probably like 6 or 7 months before he died about just how he really regretted the time he was spending away from her. And how if he could do it all over again, he's not sure if he would have made the same decisions about dedicating his life to the CIA. And that stuck with me, especially as I started to have children. I thought, man, the chief of the CIA base over there, she had 3 children and died in that
Oh
same
my
suicide
goodness.
attack. Yeah, just heart wrenching. And
So
this
that
is
could have been you.
it could have been me. I mean, this is for real. This is not like a movie or a TV show. Like this is real life, and these are your
Right.
kids. And seeing, I went to his funeral and everything, and just seeing the look on his wife and his little girl's face, you know, I was like, I'm not sure if I can do this long term. But I have the utmost respect for those men and women that continue to make the sacrifices and and their families make the sacrifices to do that job. I just, in the end, I felt like I couldn't do both. I wish I could have, but I just couldn't
Right.
anymore. Yeah.
And you wound up doing how long?
10 years.
Okay. A
Yeah.
long time.
I had a good run.
Yeah. It's a long time.
I had a good run. And yeah, and doing that kind of work when, all the moms listening, when you're big and pregnant and everything, it was exhausting. So I think I had
Sure.
just kind of reached my end. And then what I kind of going back to what I said before, I was tired of making promises to people that I couldn't keep. I had a real moral dilemma with that.
Right. Yeah. I imagine very anxiety provoking, not just for you, but also for your family.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Particularly when you were overseas. Your family knows you're overseas.
Right.
They know what's going on.
Right. Yeah.
It's got to be quite draining for families.
Oh
You know,
yeah.
and I don't know what support services the
Yeah.
intelligence community has. Here for first responders, for police and fire, we have peer support, we have chaplains, we have therapists, we have teams of people that assist first responders and their families. But I don't
Right.
know what's available to the intelligence community.
Yeah, that I think that's wonderful. I think that CI needs to look into that. Honestly, I think it's almost the reverse. If you go see a therapist, you actually have to report it.
Hmm.
And I think it's looked down upon. I remember my initial interviews. I had not seen a therapist at that point in my life, but I'm proud to say that I have now. And um, I know I would be looked down upon if I would have seen a therapist before I got that job. They would say, "Oh no, she's got something wrong with her. Can't can't
Right.
have this." So unfortunately, it's kind of, I think you're just kind of supposed to suck it up and keep going.
Right.
And it's really bad for you. It's really bad for you and for your family. And yeah, unfortunately, I don't think that's the way it is there.
Yeah, I know the FBI does have therapists on staff.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know to what extent they're involved and how that all plays out, but I do know that there are, licensed clinicians that now work for the FBI in the employee assistance role.
Mhm.
But I will say that, particularly with first responders, which FBI special agents are as well, um, peer support goes a long way
Yeah.
because, it- people want to talk to somebody who's been through what they're going through,
Right.
you know. And we've seen a lot of progress, although we have seen a lot of suicides amongst law enforcement and firefighters,
Yeah.
particularly over the past 2 years.
Yeah.
It's gotten worse.
Mhm.
Um, but I'm sure that the intelligence community would really benefit from more supportive services in place,
Oh, yeah.
you know. And I guess, you know, when someone dies in service,
Mhm.
particularly let's say CIA or one of the
Mhm.
other intelligence agencies. Well, let's talk about CIA specifically. Is it like in the movies where they get the star on the wall?
Yeah. Yeah, you
Yeah,
get the star on the wall. We had a big ceremony for him and the other officers that died. I remember it vividly. We were out in a tent at Langley, and her one of the wives was actually pregnant when it happened, and she carried her newborn baby down after the, yeah, it was after the flag, and it was just, oh, big alligator tears, as you can
right,
imagine.
right.
And yeah, no, all of that, they all got stars.
And do those stars on the walls have names, or it's just a star?
It's just a star. Yeah. I don't think I think they just like within the last 5 or 6 years made the names public on who perished.
Correct.
It was a
Yeah.
secret for a while. And they have to have, the consents of the families and all that.
Yeah, and I imagine the families would generally agree to that
Hmm.
so that they
Hmm.
could
Yeah.
get the recognition, you know, that
Right.
the deceased person could get the recognition that they deserve
Right.
for having paid the ultimate sacrifice in service.
Right.
And you know, I think that's something that people don't generally understand, or um, they 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 really don't understand what that means
Right.
when you take that oath of office and you sign on, whether it's in the military, in intelligence service, police, fire. You know, you're putting your life on the line.
Hmm.
You're taking that oath and you're saying you're going to do it
Yeah.
to your last breath.
Right.
And I don't know that people really understand what that really means.
Right. Well, and to be fair, I don't think I really knew what it meant. I think I was really naive and young, and I just was like, "Whoa, let's do this," And it took that incident to just that tragedy to really make it real for me. Because especially like in my office at CIA, like people pop in and out of there. Oh, I'm going to Mosul this week. Oh, I'm going to Kabul. I'll see you later. Like it's no big deal.
Right.
And I remember talking, my husband has nothing to do with the intelligence community. And when I was going out to Baghdad, I was like, okay, I'm going to Baghdad. Like, I'll be gone for a couple weeks. I'll be back. He's like, do you know like how weird it is that you like pop over to Baghdad? Like, what is this?
Right. You say that like other people say, I'm going to Palm Beach for the weekend, you know?
Right. Yeah. He's like, what? Where are you going? So yeah, no, I think it's important to understand the risks involved for
Yeah,
sure.
for sure, for sure. And the fact that also, you know, for the rest of your life, there are certain things that you still can't discuss.
Right.
You know, that
Right.
confidentiality agreement is until your death,
Right. Yeah. You got to be careful.
right? And um, how difficult is it to write a book,
Yeah.
having served in the intelligence service, and what does that process look like? And I know there's been other authors that have written about their experience, particularly they've written nonfiction,
Right.
and they've talked about training at the farm
Hmm.
and things like that.
Hmm.
Um, and I remember years ago, and I can't remember the name of the book. It's a very good book. I read it, and it was written by a CIA officer, a female,
Uh-huh.
who talked about recruitment, talked about her time at the farm, and I
Is
can't
it
remember.
My Life Undercover?
I I
Amaryllis Fox?
who was it?
Amaryllis Fox?
I
No?
I don't remember. I'm
Okay.
gonna have to look it up. I'm
Yeah.
gonna have to look it up because it was a really good book.
Yeah.
And I lent it to someone, and of course, you lend out your good books, you never get them back.
Right. Right. Yeah.
But what does that process look like to get
Um,
published?
yeah. So I wrote fiction, right? So I think that that kind of helped me stay out of trouble quite a bit. And I really push the envelope with my fiction in the sense that it is very imaginative. It's grounded in my experience at CIA. It's grounded in those methodologies that we use, but it more deals with like the moral dilemmas of being a spy. And um, you know, it's imaginative in the sense that it's in the future. It's in the year 2050. It's not even called CIA. It's called the Syndicate, is the intelligence conglomerate. Um, so yeah, I would say that really helped me stay out of trouble. But we have there's a process in place for all CIA, former CIAers. You have to go through a thing called a publication review board, and not all officers do this, and they get in trouble for it. But I did do it, and you basically put your book up at this board, and they make a decision of whether or not you can publish it with their consent. And I've gone through that process several times with this book, because every time you edit it, you have to get it reevaluated. So, as you can imagine in writing, you're editing quite a bit. So
Sure.
you're sending lots of copies. And
So
even
you follow the rules.
I do follow
Okay.
the rules. Because I don't want to mess anybody up. I don't want to reveal anything I'm not supposed to, because we still use a lot of tactics and things like that. So I never really understood the people that get out and, we say, you know, give away the farm,
Right.
because you're compromising the lives of your friends and colleagues by doing
Right.
that, because those tactics are meant to be kept secret. Because if you give away all of our secrets, they're going to know we're coming, and they're going to know how we do what we do, and you really don't want to get into that. How would you feel if they did that to you before you worked in the intelligence field, and they were
Sure.
risking your life by giving up all of our tradecraft? So no, I follow the rules when it comes to that. And yeah, so that's the long and short of it. Just submit the book, and it was a pretty easy process. I mean,
Right.
because I was very intentional in my writing to disguise things and to make sure that I didn't give away things that I wasn't supposed to. It passed with flying colors. There was no blacking out of anything. I know that there are quite a few books that go up to the publication review board, and they come out and they're all marked up. And I'm sure you've read a few of them where it's like you've got the black marks in it to the extent where you can't really read anything. You don't know
Right.
what's going on in the story. So I didn't want to have that issue either.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
And I imagine it would be harder for someone writing a nonfiction book or a biography, autobiography, because
Mhm.
you know there would be a tendency to disclose more real processes and
Yes.
acronyms and tradecraft and you
Yes.
know processes and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think it just depends on what's your goal in writing the book too. I mean, I'm not writing the book to draw attention to what I used to do, believe it or not.
Right. Right.
I'm writing because I like to write, and I really enjoy fiction. I like to read and I like to write, and I want to make a career out of this. It's not
Excellent.
because I want to go and, tell everybody how to make their own CIA.
Right. And let me just mention and give listeners a background about Juliet's War,
Right.
which is the current title.
Yes, yes.
And Syndicate spied Juliet Arroway and her best friend Mariam, a progressive Saudi princess, and passionate proponent of clean energy and women's equality in the region, hunt energy terrorists to put an end to a global energy war. But when an op to find a key player in the terrorist network goes wrong and a successful attack is launched on Westminster Hall, the syndicate the syndicate begins to suspect that Miriam's family is somehow involved. To make matters more devastating, Juliet's serious boyfriend, Jean Marc, is targeted and killed, leaving her grieving and even more determined to stop the war. On syndicate orders, Juliet is paired with a dashing, arrogant FBI agent, Graham, to infiltrate Miriam's family to prevent further attacks. As much as Juliet dislikes Graham at first, she cannot deny their connection or the comfort that comes from being able to share her work with him, something she has never been able to do with Jean Marc. With Graham, Juliet embarks on a dangerous journey towards survival and love as they cross the globe from London to Riyadh, Paris to Istanbul, and Moscow to Chechny's city of the dead to put an end to the war that cost them both. And when Miriam discovers the truth behind her family's involvement, she joins Juliet and Graham in their quest. But when peace means a stunning betrayal, Juliet must decide if her mission and achieving equal rights for women in the region justifies the crushing defeat of others. So it's quite the weave of fact and fiction,
Yes.
right? And and you have some of your personal passion in there with women's rights,
Right. Yes. That had to
right?
make its way into the book.
Of course, of course.
Yes. So yeah,
That's
no, I'm very excited about this book. I really I think it gets a I think we can learn a lot about some serious issues through art, through fiction, literature, poetry, the you know documentaries. I think you can learn a lot through things like that you're enjoying. You're enjoying the fiction, you're enjoying the story and where it's taking you, but you're learning a lot about a part of the world that you might not know about and you've always kind of wanted to know more about. So I'm hoping that that's what Juliet's War does for a lot of my readers, is opens up a door into a world that you might not otherwise know. What's it like to be an intelligence officer, a female over in the Middle East and doing these things and living in these life or death situations, and then also navigating love and what that looks like, and working with the FBI. How does CIA and FBI work together? I remember that was one of your questions. We really explore that in this book, and the dynamics of that relationship and the conflicts that exist, but then also the strength that has come out of things like 9/11 and learning from our mistakes, and how dedicated officers are to working together to prevent further attacks, and in taking a look at those key issues like women's rights and espionage, and what are the moral dilemmas of espionage, and what's it like to get inside the mind of a intelligence officer when they're talking to a terrorist and trying to get them to share critical information that's going to prevent the next 9/11. What does that mindset look like, and how do we go about that? So I'm really excited for my readers and to jump into that world that I've created.
I'm very excited. I'm looking forward to it as well. So you have to keep us posted and let us know
I will.
when it's released.
Thank you. I will. Absolutely. Hopefully sooner rather than later.
And for the listeners that want to connect with Kathleen, you can go to CathleenButler.com, and that's Kathleen with a C. And if you want to connect with her on Instagram, former spy and the number one. So, Kathleen, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Any last questions or comments that you may have?
No, thank you so much for this interview and for shedding light on these really critical issues. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to mention that you're certainly welcome to come back at any time.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate you taking the time to participate and be a guest on the show.
Of course. Thank you. Happy New Year.
And likewise. So that's a wrap, folks. We thank you so much for tuning in to the Michael Calderin Show. If you want to listen to a previous show, you can look up The Michael Calderon Show. We're available on Anchor, Spotify, Apple iTunes, and other platforms. We thank you so much for tuning in.